Comparing to scary stories from other countries, one of the things I notice is there are proportionally a lot more stories from Korea that takes place in schools. Strong emphasis on education is overall common in Far East Asia, but it is especially strong in Korea because for decades after the devastating poverty and political chaos following the Korean War, education was deemed as the only way to forge the better future. After all, the country is not blessed with rich natural resources or mild climate, and human resource was the only resource in abundance. The public education in Korea is comprised with 6 years in elementary or primary school, 3 years in middle school, another 3 years in high school, and if you are willing and manage to get enough score from SAT, then 4 years in university. Already from the primary school years, almost all kids would be taking extra lessons or cram schools, and it would only get more and more intense towards the SAT at the end of high school. For many high school students, the day in the school starts at about 7 in the morning. Official classes would finish at about 5 p.m., but there would usually be a couple of hours of extra classes after that, and then many students would still be expected to stay in school and study until 9 or 10 at night. The long day is not yet over for many, though. Often they have to attend further cram schools or private lessons into early hours of the morning, and by the time they are back home, there will be barely a few hours to catch a sleep before repeating another cycle. It is then not a surprise at all that any story from many teenage years, whether it be comic, tragic, or scary, should take place in schools when the life is practically dominated by it. Imagine thousands of young students at their puberty with their bursting energies, cramped together in a confined space all day long, day after day. There will be plenty of learnings, laughters, and bonding, but also plenty of anxiety, stress, suppressed desire, and jealousy. On top of that, the daily schedule that forces students to stay in school into the late nights, and the atmosphere of old school buildings with dim fluorescent lamps and long corridors with squeaking wooden floors make schools a perfect backdrop of all sorts of urban myth and horror stories. Indeed, starting from the late 1990s to this day, there are a whole array of Korean horror films that involves around schools reflecting this. I recommend the first Whispering Corridor from 1998 as the very first film that started the whole genre. It does feel a bit dated, but also depicts the various layers of the school life in Korea. Repressive teachers, peer pressures, and jealousy, stress, and anxiety to live as a student. So, here are 5 allegedly true stories from Korea about mysterious experiences in schools. As always, handpicked, translated, and narrated by your host, Anthony. It's a story that has been floating around in my high school, said to have happened to one of our graduates. As usually the case with such stories, it could all be just a made-up rumor, but who knows? My school was situated in a quiet corner of a quiet small town. The building was new and well-equipped, but there was nothing around. It being a girls' school, there weren't that many playing balls or games on the playground, and even the school-run kiosk was in the separate building from the classrooms. So apart from girls chattering, which of course was just as loud as anywhere else, the school was indeed usually very quiet. Such is the background setting, and now on to the story. Let's call our heroine Mi-young. One day was the after-class study time. One student sitting by the window informed the class, "Oh gosh, it's raining." It was a bad news for most, as the school was not most conveniently connected by public transportation, but it was especially worse as Myung was one of the few who walked to school from home. It was time before mobile phone was widely available, so during the break there formed a long queue in front of the public phone on the lobby to call their parents to either come to pick them up or to bring umbrella. There actually was another public phone at the basement where the club room's situated. But already late at night and on the damp rainy day, not many girls seemed to want to venture down there. The basement had been already notorious with various rumors about ghost apparitions. Myung could not get a chance to call home during the short 10-minute break. She managed to sneak out during the class for the excuse of using toilet and seeked a chance to use the phone. But well, she was not the only clever girl, and there was still a long queue in the lobby. In the end, she decided to try her luck and went down to the basement. The light was down there except for the green exit lights at each end of the corridor. Myung could finally call home, and her mom answered.
Hello?
"Mom, it's Myung."
What? Who?
"Myung, it's your daughter."
I don't hear you well.
"Why, is the line not good? It's Myung, Mom."
Myung, is that you? Where are you?
"School, where else? It's raining now here."
School? Why is it so noisy then? Tell other girls to hush down a little bit.
"I'm alone here. What noise?"
I hear all the girls shouting around you.
Myung dropped the phone and ran back to her class, crying. She was so obviously shocked that the other classmates brought in their homeroom teacher, and only then Myung could calm herself down enough to explain what had happened. The whole class went hullabaloo upon hearing Myung's story, but the teacher kept calm as if it wasn't the first time. He let Myung use the phone at the teacher's office and kept the class quiet. That's the end of the story. It might have been simply the line being crossed, but a rainy night at the girls' school's basement does make a perfect stage for such a story to set. Back in my high school, as with most other schools, in my high school too were the extra evening classes and study slot more or less enforced into the late night. The only exemptions were those who were aiming art, music, sports major, and I being one of them usually didn't have to join them. But one evening, I decided to stay longer at school to finish the book we were assigned to read. We were to take a quiz on the content of the book later. As all the classrooms were occupied for extra evening classes, I asked my homeroom teacher if I could use the library, and he handed me over the key with the usual warnings that I should keep quiet and shouldn't leave any mess behind. It was a bit of a privilege to have the whole library to myself. I locked myself in there and read the book a while, but not long after, well, I dozed off. I don't know how long I'd been sleeping, but woke up from noises from behind. It was late autumn then, and in the library it was already getting dark in the dusk. The noise sounded like somebody tapping a pen rhythmically on the desk. Distinctively plasticky and pretty regular. It sounded definitely somebody doing it deliberately. I was spooked, alone in the dark library, and I did lock myself in when I came in. I tried to figure out where exactly the sound was coming from. It sounded like about 2 rows back from where I was sitting. The desks in the library were partitioned with screens well above my sitting height. I could not dare to stand up to look over and check, so I decided to look down under the desk instead. I could see a school uniform skirt and legs. Somebody was indeed sitting behind me. I tried to rationalize the situation, that somebody else must have been granted the access to the library and was given the key. Feeling a bit braver now, I decided to turn on the light of the library. I quietly stood up, but after just a few steps, the tapping noise stopped. I carried on walking through the rows of desks towards the light switch, but there was nobody. But where's that girl whose legs I just saw? I creeped out once again. I ran and turned on the lights and quickly looked around again. Nobody. The door was still locked too. Come to think of it, even in my sleep, I didn't hear that creaky door opening at all. I packed all my stuffs and got out of there right away. I didn't dare to go to the library again, fearing another encounter with her for the rest of my high school years. This happened when I was 18, in the last year of high school. It was the class right after the lunchtime. Many classmates were taking advantage of the teacher being not very strict and were discreetly dozing off. So the classroom was quiet, apart from teacher's lecture, enough for me to clearly hear the noises from the outside. Suddenly I heard somebody whispering. I could not make out a single word clearly, but it was so close to me, as if a friend wrote in my ears, that I almost felt the breath and the presence. At first I thought it should be a classmate sneaked up behind me, but there was nobody when I looked around. I was sitting at the very end of my line, and it couldn't have been anybody sitting behind me pulling a prank. I just shrugged and resumed my focus back to the book. Then the whisper resumed, but this time on the opposite side of the ear. I quickly looked up and round again. My wondering eyes met the equally wondering eyes of the girl sitting on the next line. We looked at each other's confused face a while. The girl scribbled a memo to me asking, "You heard that too, didn't you?" "Yeah, I did. You too? Did you understand what it was saying?" I whispered to her. We were discussing what it would have been in a low voice, when that strange whisper came back, which prompted the girl to scream out and ran to the teacher. The quiet classroom was of course turned upside down, but the incident was just brushed off with no conclusion. It may not be so scary as a story, but I still dislike to be whispered in the ear to this day. The high school I attended was an all-girls school situated away from everything, literally at the end of a walking trail on the hillside. Due to its location, combined with the old buildings, there were lots of rumors about ghost sightings. I was then a member of the dance club of the school, and that day we were very busy preparing for the annual festival. We were still rehearsing at the school hall when the clock hit 10 p.m. There was gallery seats forming the upper level, and behind it was the control room with a little window. The leader of the club was talking to the control room about music and technical issues, so the rest of us on the stage were all facing towards the auditorium. Using the opportunity, I checked the clock hanging in the middle of the banister of the gallery and saw some black shadow over the clock. Before I could take a closer look, the music was back on, and I had to go back to the dance routine. But I could not quite take my mind off from the shadow over the clock and kept sneaking a look. Then, suddenly the shadow fell. Not a free fall to the ground, but a gradual descent as if coming down on a rope. It started moving side to side like a pendulum, its movement getting ever bigger as it got lower. I froze with fear. Then one colleague screamed, instantly followed by other screams. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who witnessed the thing. It created panic, and everybody ran out of the hall whether they saw it actually themselves or not. In that moment, I myself panicked too much to realize what I was seeing. But I think the black thing that fell down was in the shape of a human head, and apparently was hanging by its long hair. Outside the hall, everybody was crying and hysteric that they could not possibly return to the hall, would not perform on that stage, but soon shushed down by the club leader, a senior student. "Stop the nonsense and go back to the rehearsal. The show must go on." Fortunately, by the time we were back to the hall, the dangling head wasn't there anymore. But it wasn't the last time it was witnessed in the school hall. I left the dance club the following year, but I heard the head appeared once again when the club members were rehearsing the show for another annual festival. A year ago, I was in the last year of high school. To make up the first 2 years which I had spent carefreely, I worked really hard in the last year towards the big day of SAT. It was during the finals of the first term. The following day I was expecting tests for 3 subjects. One of them was English, my favorite, so I worked on the other 2 subjects first and saved English for the last. But when I finally picked up English, I realized I forgot to bring some of the important textbooks from school. Shit. English was too important a subject to give up. Time was heading to 9 p.m. and it was getting dark, but I had no other option but going back to school. My school is consisted with 3 buildings. The main block, plus 2 separate extra buildings were on each side facing each other. My classroom was in the extra building. Empty school at night is a spooky place to be. The only light source were from the street lamps outside and green light from exit signs. I somehow could not shake off from my mind the images from horror films I had watched. When I managed to get to my locker and took out the all-precious textbook, I happened to look out of the window and at the opposite building. On the 5th floor of that building was the gym. And in there, through the window, I could see something. It looked like a person, but it moved strangely. I just kept looking at it blankly. It was the curiosity before fear set in. Should have resisted it and just ran out of there then. Then I felt it saw me looking. I could not clearly see it, but sensed its eyes meeting mine, and also that it smirked. fear started creeping up finally. But then it disappeared from the window. Thank God. The staircase hall of the building was cladded with 4 windows, and one could see the whole view of people walking up and down. And there, that thing was running down with an unbelievable speed. And now under the lights that came on with motion detection, I could clearly see that its joints from neck to arms to hands to legs, knees and ankles were all twisting and turning in grotesque angles as it moved. It moved so fast, I think it barely took it 10 seconds from the 5th floor to the ground floor, and now it was running towards the building I was in. As it got closer, I could see its body was black as if burnt out. Where the eyes should have been were 2 black holes, and lips were torn side to side, dripping blood. Only after seeing it running into my building, the flight mode kicked in. If I'm caught, I'm dead, was all I could think. I ran to the exit on the opposite side. I don't think I ever run so fast. Just before I threw myself over the stairs, I could not resist and took one last look back. That thing was already on the hallway through the opposite staircase. In the quiet, empty hallway was echoing the terrible sound of it moving, metallic, grinding, grating noises of its joints twisting and turning. My hairs all stood on end. I don't know how I did it, but when I could think again, I was out of the school ground. I looked back at the school, and there it still was. It was looking at me from the window of my classroom. I ran the rest of the way back home. Of course, I could not do anything for the rest of the night but shivering under the duvet. It was the first paranormal experience in my life, and I had absolutely no idea how to process it. After the sleepless night, I went to the school early. Tests were still real, and I thought to have a quick look at the textbook before the test. Suppressing the creeping fear, I went to my classroom. And in front of the door was my English textbook, which I dropped during the flight the previous night. I picked it up and nearly fainted. There was bloody handprint on it, as if somebody had grabbed it hard. I ripped the book into pieces and threw away in the bin. I, of course, ruined the English test that day. For the rest of the year, I could not even give a casual look at the window of the gym after dark. Thank God I didn't see it again, at least. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for your listening. I was never quite a happy student myself, unfortunately. I didn't make troubles, but neither felt comfortable among peers nor in disciplinary school environment. Especially into my puberty, those 6 years in middle and high schools I could not wait to put behind me. It is a bit sad in a sense that I don't have so much to remember or talk about those years. Not even a scary one. How about you? Any unforgettable memory from your school years? Following up this week's theme, next time I'm going to read stories that takes place in military as another important and inescapable step to go through in a Korean's life. So stay tuned. If you enjoyed my work, please give it a thumbs up, leave comments, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. It all really helped this little channel grow. Until the next, stay safe and take care.